What if I told you that the entire human race owes $300 trillion, and yet there is absolutely no one sitting on another planet waiting to collect it, meaning that the total debt of the global economy is mathematically owed to itself? A massive financial paradox that completely defies everything you know about money. Welcome to Money's Hidden Past. Rich people lied, we fact-checked. Today we're stripping down the absolute illusion of the global sovereign debt crisis and explaining why every single country on Earth is perpetually operating in the red. When you look at the terrifying headlines about the massive global debt clock, it is incredibly easy to feel a profound sense of panic for the future if every single nation is completely drowning in unpayable catastrophic debt. Who exactly holds the master ledger, and who is collecting the weekly payments? The media wants you to picture a giant collection agency preparing to repossess the earth. But the short and fascinating answer is that countries do not go bankrupt like regular people. The global macroeconomic system is intentionally designed to run entirely on credit. And a sovereign government debt is actually a highly valuable asset for whoever lent the money to understand why the system works the way it does. We must break a mental habit. We constantly project our own personal household finances onto the federal government when a regular person takes out a mortgage. They have a limited biological lifespan. They eventually have to pay off the principal balance before they physically die. If you lose your job and run out of cash, the commercial bank takes your family home. You do not have the legal authority to simply demand a higher salary from your boss, and you certainly cannot retreat to your basement and print your own legal currency. You are bound by the strict and unforgiving laws of traditional consumer finance governments. However, operate in a completely different physical and financial universe. They are essentially immortal entities that do not have a biological expiration date, meaning they absolutely never have to completely pay off their massive historical credit cards. They simply manage the minimum monthly interest payments in perpetuity forever. If a sovereign nation desperately needs more capital to cover their immediate expenses, they have the supreme legal authority to theoretically raise taxes on millions of citizens, siphoning massive amounts of private wealth directly back into the public treasury, a ruthless mechanical power that no private citizen or corporation could ever possess. Furthermore, since the historical end of the gold standard. In 1971, modern money is entirely a fiat currency backed by nothing but the government reputation. The central bank has the complete unyielding monopoly over the physical money supply, meaning a nation that controls its own currency can technically never run out of cash. So when a massive government bond finally reaches its mature expiration date, the Treasury does not reach into a vault and hand over physical gold to pay it off. They simply issue a brand new financial bond to immediately pay off the old one, rolling the debt forward into the future as long as the global market keeps buying. But this raises a deeply logical question about the nature of federal spending. If a government has the legal authority to literally print money out of thin air, why do they bother borrowing it at all and putting their country into massive debt? Why not just print the exact amount of cash needed to run the entire country? Governments intentionally choose to run a deficit to fund massive necessary projects. They need capital to build sprawling interstate highways and fund powerful militaries. They need to pay for public health care systems and properly educate their young citizens. These are monumentally expensive operations that require a constant flow of vast wealth. If the central bank simply printed new physical cash to pay for all of these projects, they would violently flood the open market with an unprecedented amount of currency. That sudden flood of new money would immediately trigger catastrophic hyperinflation, completely destroying the purchasing power of the working class and collapsing the state. So rather than printing the cash and destroying the underlying value of the currency, the government intentionally borrows the money by selling sovereign treasury bonds. They soak up the existing capital that is already circulating in the open global market, promising to pay the investors a highly reliable interest rate over a fixed period of time. Which leads us to the ultimate question of who is actually buying all of these bonds if the entire world owes $300 trillion who is sitting on the wealth. The shocking truth is that for the most part, a country simply owes the debt to itself. The massive national debt is largely held by regular citizens and domestic private banks. When you look at a traditional national debt clock spinning out of control, you are looking at a mirror reflecting the private savings of the domestic population. If you have a retirement account, a corporate pension, or a standard mutual fund, there is an incredibly high statistical probability that you own government debt. The sovereign government borrowed your physical cash to build a local bridge, and in return, they are quietly paying your retirement account a steady yield of interest in this highly specific structural sense. The terrifying national debt of a country is actually the foundational private wealth of the exact same country, but citizens are not the only entities actively buying up massive amounts of federal debt. Sovereign nations constantly buy each other's debt as a form of global economic strategy. Foreign governments hold trillions of dollars in foreign treasury bonds in their vaults because it forces a deeply interconnected web of mandatory global cooperation. If a massive Eastern manufacturing country owns $1 trillion in Western debt, they have a deeply vested financial interest in the Western economy remaining stable. Because if the Western economy collapses, they will never get their $1 trillion back, creating a fascinating system of mutual financial hostage-taking that prevents global wars. When two massive superpowers owe each other an incomprehensible amount of money, dropping bombs on each other becomes incredibly bad for the global corporate bottom line. The debt creates a delicate structural piece built entirely on the fear of financial ruin, weaving the competing nations together in an unbreakable net of shared economic destiny. This system has functioned relatively smoothly for decades following the Second World War, but while operating in debt is completely normal for a sovereign modern nation, the total outstanding mathematical volume of that debt has recently violently skyrocketed, creating severe structural fractures in the foundation of the global financial order. This terrifying explosion in global borrowing did not happen by total random chance. It is the direct historical result of three massive and unprecedented economic shocks that forced governments around the entire world to borrow at a terrifying velocity, stretching the boundaries of fiat currency to their absolute maximum breaking point. The first massive shock was the global financial crisis of 2008, when the completely unregulated mortgage industry pushed the banking system to the brink. Global governments were forced to borrow heavily to immediately bail out the massive banks and artificially stimulate the crashing economy to prevent a total worldwide depression. They essentially placed the massive private gambling losses of the wealthy banking elite directly onto the public credit card of the taxpayer to save the entire system. This added trillions of dollars to the global debt ledger in a matter of months, establishing a dangerous precedent that the government would always rescue the market before the global economy could truly heal from the massive banking bailout. The human race was hit by the historic global health crisis of 2020. Governments around the world legally ordered their local businesses to physically close, sending billions of workers home and instantly destroying the global supply chain. Because the businesses were closed, the government tax revenue violently plummeted, but their financial obligations to keep their desperate citizens alive skyrocketed. Governments borrowed tens of trillions of dollars in an incredibly short window of time, mailing physical stimulus checks directly to citizens to prevent mass starvation. The scale of the borrowing was unprecedented in the entire history of human civilization, but it was executed under the assumption that borrowing money would always remain cheap. For the entire decade following the banking crisis of 2008, global central banks had kept foundational interest rates sitting artificially near zero, meaning governments could borrow $1 trillion and pay almost nothing in interest, making the massive expansion of the global debt seem completely and totally harmless. But that false era of free money violently crashed into the reality of the third shock, the sudden and devastating return of massive global inflation following the health crisis. When the price of food and energy began to spiral completely out of control, the central banks were forced to aggressively and repeatedly raise their interest rates. This sudden spike in borrowing costs completely changed the fundamental math of the world, turning a manageable monthly interest payment into an absolute fiscal nightmare. As we look at the financial reality of the year 2026, the simple cost of paying the interest on the accumulated national debt has become brutally expensive for almost every major developed country on Earth, putting a severe and suffocating squeeze on their operational national budgets. When a government has to spend a massive percentage of their collected tax revenue just to pay the interest owed to the bondholders, from previous financial generations, they have significantly less money available to actually fix the crumbling bridges or properly fund the future healthcare systems of the young working class. The massive web of credit that built the modern world is finally tightening its grip, exposing the mathematical reality that economic growth cannot simply be borrowed forever. The central banks are now trapped in a terrifying and impossible mathematical corner, trying to fight inflation without completely bankrupting their own sovereign governments. Ultimately, the global financial system is not a vault filled with physical money. It is a massive, delicate web of promises recorded on digital accounting ledgers. It is not that there is not enough actual money circulating in the entire world. It is that the concept of modern money is literally born from the creation of debt. If every single person in government on Earth suddenly paid off all their debts today, there would literally be absolutely no currency left circulating in the human economy. The entire system relies on the constant forward motion of the credit machine, a perpetual motion engine that must continually expand or immediately collapse. The wealthy elite completely understand how this invisible architecture actually functions. They do not fear the massive national debt because they are the ones collecting the interest. They use the system to safely park their vast fortunes in guaranteed government bonds, while the working class quietly pays the underlying taxes to fund the interest payments. If you want to survive the upcoming financial turbulence of the next decade, you have to stop looking at the economy through the lens of a household budget and start understanding the ruthless macroeconomic rules that actually run the planet. Because the people holding the master ledger are banking on your complete ignorance if this deep dive into the massive illusion of global sovereign debt and the terrifying reality of rising interest rates fired you up about understanding the literal mathematical foundation of the global economy. Then do me a massive favor. Right now, smash that like button to let the algorithm know this factual historical conversation matters. Share this video with every friend and family member who needs to understand how the real financial world operates. Let us keep exposing the true mechanics of wealth and power. I will catch you in the next one, where we break down the next hidden chapter in the long history of money and corporate authority. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, and remember that in a world where money is created entirely out of debt, the people who control the lending will always control the human race.